Hello, everyone. Welcome to Diamond Debates with Avi Krawitz. I'm Avi Krawitz, and today's topic is kind of a favorite of mine. Amid all the talk about marketing, category marketing, how to win over consumers to the natural diamond story, we sometimes forget about branding and the value add involved in that. And there has for a long time been sort of this tension for some reason between branding and category marketing. What's the right approach? I think probably, with the spoiler alert, there's no reason we can't do both, but we maybe underemphasize that branding. And we're going to talk about that today. Before I introduce my sparring partner, as always, we thank Sarin Technologies for supporting Diamond Debates. For over 35 years, Sarin has asked the industry's big questions, providing advanced AI technology to drive the diamond sector forward. Imagining a more efficient and more innovative industry is central to Sarin's DNA and essential to long-term growth across the entire diamond ecosystem. So with me to explore this topic of can branding preserve diamond value is none other than Sean Dunn. Sean is the president of Florida-based J.R. Dunn Jewelers, and he's a strong advocate for natural diamonds and has done some interesting work in the branding and marketing space. Welcome, Sean, and thank you for joining me. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Avi.
Should we dive right in? As I mentioned to you in private, one of the dangers of labeling these discussions as a debate is that there's certain topics that are maybe indisputable. But I guess the question to begin with is, it feels like the industry has struggled with the branding side. We think about the high-end luxury houses that do fantastic work and they have century-old brands, but it's always been a struggle to brand diamonds or to develop strong branding within the commercial quality diamond world. Is that an assumption that I'm correct in, that you agree with me on, and why would that be, do you think?
I totally agree with the difficulties of doing it, and it's been tried many times to varying degrees of success. I think the number one thing, and interestingly enough, there was a comment made just before we went live on LinkedIn where they point out the difficulties of branding diamonds because the way that they're cut today, there's not a huge visible difference that's discernible by the public. So that, I think, is the first hurdle that we have, is that the product, when you speak of these beacons and general marketing, we all know what a diamond looks like, but it's hard to know what a diamond brand looks like.
Yeah. Well, so does the branding depend on some uniqueness of the stone, like you say, the cuts?
I would say you have to have something that's visually different. You have to have something that can be identified on site, and that's to make it easier. That's the first hurdle that I think needs to be overcome, is differentiation in some regard.
Yeah, I think I agree with that to some extent. I think branding is more of a corporate exercise, a company exercise. So you're branding the concept, and the values behind that concept. So I'm a bit torn. On the one hand, I do agree with you that there's got to be some physical attribute that makes it unique. But I think there may be a stronger emphasis that's required on the storytelling element of the brand, and maybe that's why the industry has struggled, because we've had a century of category storytelling. That De Beers was the storyteller on the industry's behalf, and so it kind of left a bit of a gap among the rest of the industry.
No, I agree with that too. So the visual distinction might be the first hurdle, but it's not to say that it can't be done, because people do, storytelling resonates you can go deeper in, but you need to get the message across quickly. And obviously visually is, when they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, it does need to have some separation. But if you go back, what's interesting in time, there was a period not that long ago when, the controversy was about the rap sheet or about Blue Nile or about James Allen and all these other web houses. You realize that GIA almost became the diamond brand at that time, or very much so was the diamond brand, because it gave confidence. So that was not necessarily a visual separation, but everyone wanted a GIA certified diamond. So to your point, it's not always about the visual separation, even though that makes the first jump easier.
With
Confidence can also be built in by other things.
right, well, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword that, when it comes to you think about the growth of grading reports and certification of diamonds. So on the one hand, it did install confidence or infuse confidence to the consumer across the trade, etc. But on the other hand, it kind of fed into the commoditization of diamonds, and so it was very difficult. It became more difficult um, to distinguish or a special attribute in one diamond over another.
Yes, those are opposing forces.
Yeah, that
Right.
made the branding elements and the storytelling elements actually more difficult. It kind of took away the artistry or the romance of each diamond being beautiful and unique in the eye of the beholder, whereas became unique in its catalog of grading reports.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, not to get into the most popular debate in our industry, but that laid fertile ground for the inevitability of labs to come on, because we really focus so much on those grading qualities to where that's what it became about more than anything else. And when you do that, that is the direct opposite of storytelling. So now, when we're fortunate to be entering into this uh, new sort of era of thinking about diamonds and reinventing the natural diamond business and giving people something to talk about, you go to things like the old mine brilliance and these elongated cushions and these antique cuts, and all of a sudden you're showing L, M, N colors. You're talking about the diamond
Yeah.
first, and you're not talking about the grades, because I think what we've all learned is perfection has become something that's just too common. So we're back to pre-wrap, everything. This is like an exciting time to be in the business. I don't know how to explain it. I find it very refreshing.
I think you sort of tapping into a lot of my thought process there. And I think lab grown is feeding into that narrative, because as lab grown becomes, through the improved technology, it becomes more of a commoditized product where you can produce a flawless, at will. I don't think it's quite there yet, but the range of grading is certainly narrower, as we've seen with the GIA changing its grading of color and clarity. But it means that um, that flawless and that perfection will no longer be unique, and so it brings us back, as you say, to a diamond with flaws and character that that sets it apart. So those like you said, those those lower colors or medium color and clarity goods start to we stop it kind of forces us to talk about the diamond itself without just relying on that piece of paper, as you said. Let me ask you another question related to the first, and that is, it seems that it's easier to brand diamond jewelry over diamonds, and there's been a bit of an awakening, I think, an emphasis on that. And I think that is probably the more um, reasonable and accessible approach for the industry. Should we be focusing on the diamond jewelry being encompassing the design and the I guess the designer and the quality of the piece as a whole, including its other components beyond the diamond, to that branding story.
So I think, again, going back to the first point, I think it's visibly easier to explain when you have certain concepts. For example, like when you think of Cartier love bracelet, you immediately have recall as to what that is. Tiffany solitaire, you have recall of what that is. So, you're associating a particular look with something. And I think that that's really critical to involve the jewelry in storytelling. And if you look at some of the trends and how they've evolved today, it's different than how they have been previous. People can be discovered doing just a small design that through the internet or through whatever somebody's creates a piece of content. It's not doesn't necessarily need to have huge marketing dollars behind it, but the design itself can speak. One of the things that comes to mind, and it's not an entirely new design, but she certainly did an interesting take on it, was Stephanie Gottlieb and the Trois Moi rings. And, that's still going today. There's a piece of meaningful jewelry that people will talk about to symbolize different beautiful things in their lives. And to me, natural diamonds or diamonds, gemstones, whatever it is, when you're talking about a piece like that, it's a lot easier to storytell.
Well, then, how much of the story involves that natural diamond component?
So it depends. And I think, going into something that I was trying to do, obviously, like as you noted before, that I'm very passionate about diamonds and beneficiation. And this goes way, way back when Shakhtar Namdar first introduced me to Namibian diamonds and beneficiation. I was just learning, like, this was in, gosh, when they were coming out, it might have been around the time that the Alexis diamonds, one of the first attempts to brand fancy shapes. So, and having cut standards for fancy shapes. But, that always resonated with me because why wouldn't you want to give back to where diamonds are a natural resource? But all of these stories become hard to tell. And because people have a certain bandwidth that they're willing to pay attention to. And Peter Smith, I saw him, from Hearts on Fire back in the day, and he has a great brain. Anyways, he was driving in his car, giving us his thoughts, and basically it amounted to, be careful with how much information you put out there, because the human brain is wired to basically do a handful of things, which is basically food, shelter, and procreation. So when you're creating a piece of jewelry, it's kind of got to be self-evident as to what that means. And so what I tried to do, incorporating design and the story of diamonds and natural diamonds, and back to your original point, like, how do you incorporate the natural diamond into this? I came up with basically a piece of jewelry with Ada. This has been done before. It's not, and again, I'm sorry, I'm not introducing Ada yet, but Ada is a young Botswanan entrepreneur that basically started her own diamond cutting company, employs locals in Botswana. And I found her story through doing research about diamonds from Africa, because, I got very passionate about the whole debate that was happening online, and even watching the public and their perception of what diamonds were. It really motivated me to want to tell the story. But anyways, the purest story I found was hers. So I'm like, okay, I want to get back to telling the story of Botswana and the good that it did there, because all the research, even though I had been in the business for so long, I didn't, as a retailer, really understand the supply chain as well as I should have. So I really dug in, learned a lot, learned about Tracer, learned about blockchain, learned about the different initiatives that were happening. And I found her. And so I said, hey, let me try to buy some rough and let's manufacture a diamond and let me import it directly. Let me see what I can do with it, because I was very much into the story of beneficiation, Botswana being the easiest story to tell of all of them. And we went on this venture and got a rough diamond together. We won finally after going through this arduous process of registering at the Okavango Diamond Company. I've never been vetted like that in my whole life. I mean,
it's saying a lot as a jeweler. Yeah.
but anyway, so long story short, we came up with this concept where the first part of the stone, which I knew was going to yield, was a 251 round. It was a 5.79 piece of rough. And the first piece was 2.59 round brilliant. It was an ISI1 or whatever it was going to be. And I was just excited to have that. She's like, oh, it's in GIA. It's getting, through iTrace. We're going to be able to trace it right back the whole chain direct to JR Dunn. And she's like, well, what about this other little piece here? What do you want to do with that? I'm like, what do you mean? Not realizing there was another half of the diamond crystal that I bought. And so she goes, there's a 40-point oval with it. And I was excited. I'm like, oh, how cool is that? So I got the piece, I think, late last year. And it took me a few months to get the design together, but I really wanted to put something in a jewelry form that would make it easy to tell the story of origin, because people would be curious. Like when you show a ring and say, hey, these 2 diamonds that you see in this ring, they came from the same rough. That's not something that people are used to hearing. And so it kind of opens the palette a little bit. And I think when you have the possibility of doing things like that in design, I think that's where it becomes critically important to be able to go and introduce different stories. I think it makes it easier, and
Yeah.
people make it easier.
There,
Like,
there are there are a few components to that story which I really am drawn to. I loved learning about this initiative. The first is that they have we've seen manufacturers and sort of try to sell polished by showing the rough diamond that it came from. And I don't think that resonated with people. But if you have those 2 diamonds that came from the same rough, it sort of elevates that component. So I think that's one element, I think, where you're tapping into the uniqueness of the look and the story. And then the other is this idea of the origin story and marketing and branding around origin. Because I think I've kind of been a little critical of initiatives in the industry, rightly or wrongly, that there is an overemphasis on the origin story, that you can't put that as sort of the front and center of your sales pitch. It's a good backup for the broader story of a jewelry collection or piece, but it can't. Consumers don't really care enough for that to be the primary aspect of it, and so when you talk about your journey with relating to beneficiation and trying to build a brand around that, were you conscious of that aspect of it, that or was the Botswana story the main catalyst of your initiative?
So from the passion standpoint, from me, is that what you're asking? How I decided to forge ahead against what is probably the harder route?
No, well,
It
I
is
think
hard.
no. When you're thinking
Yeah.
of your consumer, when your customers, and the sellability of the piece, um, how much does origin feature into that?
So I took a different scope, like about origin going out. Of course, I started with the same belief that many hope will happen, is that people would care and that people would want to hear the story. And it's such a great story. And, why aren't we telling it and all these different things? And I found out, like everybody else, it's, you have half that care and, half that don't care. And, there's varying degrees on the half that care, whether it's going to influence their decision or not. So what I've decided in my mind is to go back to that analogy of GIA being the brand. I just want to make this part of the standard, because I think, to me, jewelers caring about their supply chain and what happens along the way gives us more agency and control of how we make this presentation. And I think we value things differently when you know where things come from. So I believe it's more of something that it gives me great pride and comfort in selling these diamonds, to where I can really stand behind them. And if somebody asks me the question of what's the most ethical diamond, or what, natural diamonds to me wins hands down. And if you asked me before I did all my research and I really dove into what this looks like, I would be one of the guys that'd be like, oh, do I see the lab diamond side or do I see this side? But my conviction now is completely different. So I think if everybody had conviction in what they're doing because they believe in their supply chain, people will feel that. And people also hearing these things know that you've made the best choice as a jeweler of what's available to you. And I think that puts some sort of a halo around your business, saying you care about your sourcing. Now, whether it's the ultimate driver, the person doing business with you knows that you have a compass, that you want to do something that does good. And people like supporting people who support the community in jewelry. There's how many jewelers are involved in different efforts in their community. It's huge. So people like human stories, people like all these things. Maybe it's not for marketing in the sense that it's going to be, the first thing you lead with on a radio ad or a TV ad or something like this. But every jeweler that puts out a magazine that has a little bit longer format content that tells you the why or the passion of what you do, and you have pictures to say, hey, this is where this came from, or this is what I believe. There's a good portion of people who may not say it, but appreciate it. And I've gotten a lot of feedback in that regard. Oh, it's really neat what you're doing, or whatever, but it's not going to drive people in droves through your door the way that people would want. This is a long-term strategy, I think, to make our business the way it should be incredible. If you look at the big watch brands, and, everyone's going to say, well, they have big pockets, they have big marketing budgets, they have all these different things to be able to do. But by a lot of them are huge proponents of sustainability, and they care about their sourcing of products and their charitable endeavors or whatever they are. I mean, Rolex and the Perpetual Planet is probably the biggest example that I could give.
Yeah.
So it's important for
Yeah,
confidence.
I mean, it kind of, I think in the old days, whenever that was, say, the 80s or 90s,
I'm old enough. Well, maybe not
I'm
80s, but
also
90s, 90s.
there was, and I didn't grow up in the United States, but I did grow up in South Africa. And my perception was that there was a marketing angle, that many jewelers kind of used the South African angle, that these are diamonds from South Africa. because people just naturally associated diamonds as being, that being the home of diamonds. Of course, the production makeup of of the global diamond industry has changed, and today Botswana and others are the major producers. Um, but there's, it feels like that was a draw card for people in the past, but it's no longer. And so I think something may have changed, but I don't think it should be either. I still think I agree with your earlier point that and that the jewelry piece has to have something unique physically that makes it stand out. And I think you've tapped into that with your, two from one. It's it's two pieces of polished from one rough diamond is, I think, a unique proposition. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic for me. There's another element of branding that I think I think maybe the also explains the sort of struggle for the diamond industry, and maybe you as a retailer can prove me wrong on this, but it seems that the strongest brands start out as wholesale brands, or maybe have have a combination of both wholesale and retail presence that sort of reinforces their name, but they're essentially distributors of their brand. Maybe that's changing now. That you think about the Cartiers of the world, and that they're more sort of big name retailers. But is there sort of is there a hurdle that as a retail jeweler one needs to overcome to establish oneself as a brand in the industry, in the consumer mindset, or even a collection as a that you're developing to enhance its brand value?
All retailers, I think, especially I can only speak for my scale. I'm a single store independent. Obviously, I've been fortunate with having reach. I got lucky early on in the internet days in 2005. I was one of the first ones online, so I ended up getting a little bigger footprint than a lot of independents. But we all experience the same thing. And going back to what was online, the things that drew traffic to my website were the bigger brands. So we rely on these bigger brands to kind of pull traffic to us as independent retailers. But now I think something different has happened since back in those early days, is that anybody can have a voice and anybody can get out there and tell their story. If they're passionate about it and stick to it, they can grow. And that's, what I want to put out there for other independent jewelers to see, is that, this whole, why I'm here today, I'm sitting here because I got passionate about reading about lab diamonds and natural diamonds and wanting to be on the side of what is the most ethical diamond. And the hurdle that needs to be crossed to brand, whether it's branding yourself or others, is basically have something that you just believe in and you are convicted about, and you're willing to go out there and risk quite a few things that are possibly not going to land right or not going to be a commercial success off the bat. I mean, our first venture was April of 2025. We started with something called single source, to telling the story about, this was, I was like, oh, I don't want Botswana-sourced, or I don't want, the different aggregated, I want to know the exact country where this came from. So we started calling tracer. We were calling everybody, trying to figure out, we'd see tracer ads. We didn't know what they were, like in early 2005, or, maybe even 2024, I started seeing it on blockchain, about blockchain. But, Yeah, so we went out there and told that story about this one's from Namibia, this one's from South Africa, this one's from Botswana. And to your point, it's like kind of people were like, "Oh yeah, okay," and you would get very few people. Ironically, I would sell somebody that's family was from South Africa. It's like, "Oh, that's cool. I want that diamond because my family's from South Africa," or whatever it was. You never knew what was going to hit there, but it wasn't the mass commercial success. So the hurdle is basically as an independent. I think what we need to do collectively is build around whether it's origin or whatever it is that the belief is, it could be these old mine cuts that you're falling in love with now or whatever it is, just really falling in love with the product again and caring about the product and being custodians of the product of natural diamonds. And I think that's the agency that independent jewelers that we need to have again. And why I like origin and these different stories is it gives us a point to focus on, and it's something that's good and it's telling a good story. Now, how we tell that story, we all can work on together and refine it. But if the whole industry is moving in some sort of organized fashion to get the message out that natural diamonds are the ethical choice, I see that as a big win because we all know that people chose labs mainly because of price points, but use the ethical argument as something that reinforced their purchase and made that purchase acceptable in their minds because they made the better choice. It wasn't because, they didn't want to spend the money. It was because this is the ethical choice. So why would we let somebody steal that high ground? And I think the independent jewelers have to watch what they're doing right now, especially if you're promoting the other side of the business. One doesn't exist without the other. Labs do not exist without naturals. Nobody's going to want your lab diamonds if people stop wanting naturals. So we have to protect that as independent jewelers first. And if we can find a way to create pieces or tell stories around that, that's what we should be doing, So that's what I'm trying to do. And it's not the easiest road. I mean, getting out there and beating that drum or doing what, it's taken me a year and a half to get on your podcast.
Well, you made it. It's all downhill from now, But you did you touched on an interesting point that I think is not said enough, that the lab grown industry needs a sustainable natural diamond industry for its own survival, I think. But you also mentioned selling on price, which is kind of where it's the advantage that lab grown has. Um, I'm wondering, and you haven't really sort of you mentioned the ethical angle, which I think is a strong storytelling element, but but that idea of value and buying a product of value that's going to sustain at least some of its value, you know, um, versus that price point sale. I would imagine that's something that resonates with the consumer, A, and B, can be fairly easily built into the brand story. That's that idea of value, and maybe using both senses of the word, financial value and the values that it represents, um, would be a strong selling point.
So value in this, I think, I have a pretty opposite view of, I think the biggest argument that was made early on in the lab versus naturals was the diamond tiers sticking to value as their biggest argument. And I think that landed flat. I think customers don't really understand that, especially like if the question is, if I buy this today and I go sell it tomorrow, what's it worth? I just don't think that that's something the way that the diamond should be sold or ever sold. It would be naive to think that price isn't playing a certain place in people's decisions. It certainly is. But that's also why I really like, and I didn't understand it at first, but the desert diamond play is brilliant because what it allows, it first takes away the mathematical equation of where you have carat, clarity, color, price. Takes it away immediately. Because that's just not how that product is sold. The product is sold. I mean, the first time that I sold a desert diamond, I couldn't believe how easy this sale was. It was remarkable. Somebody came in with a picture, is either Pinterest or Instagram or whatever, and he says, "This is what my girlfriend wants." I was fresh off the Tucson show. And ironically, at Tucson, I was going around the booths and I'd be like, wow, some of the regular bread and butter diamond guys, honestly, were very quiet. And the smaller sizes, and if you're just cutting production rounds or whatever they were, it's just quiet. So then I go by this one booth and I go, whoa. I'm like, what's going on there? I saw all these, very well-dressed ladies there, tall, blondes, beautiful, whatever, taking pictures, doing this, doing all these.
Know exactly which booth you're talking about, but carry on.
Okay. So anyways, I'm going, what the heck is happening here? So I'm like trying to fight my way in there. I'm like, no, I can actually buy. I felt like the guy that says, hey, I can afford this. Let me in. I want to see it. I want to buy some. I want to see what's going on. So I look, and they're all these old mine cuts. They're champagne diamonds. They're, the antique stones. They're estate pieces. They're all these different things. And these young ladies were making the best pictures. I mean, creating content right on the spot, sending pieces to their customers, like creating demand, the excitement. You could tell, they weren't pulling out the GIA sheets.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So going back so anyways, I brought a few of these stones back. I mean, I was so impressed. I fell in love with that booth, and now I'm doing a good amount of business there. So it's so fun. But anyways, I came back and the customer showed me the picture. And I had bought at that show, and at that booth, I think it was a 360 or something like that. It was graded QR VS, Old Mine Brilliant, with fair symmetry at the time. So I show it to the customer. I'm like, hey, this is what I think is in the picture. I think this is right along those lines, and it's a beautiful diamond. It's a candlelight cut. And we went into the whole story of why I liked it and why he thought it was beautiful too. He's like, well, it looks exactly like what she wants. And he goes, how much is it? And at the time I undersold it. I think I told him it was like $18,000 or whatever it was, plus a mounting. He was right in at 20 for like a 3.5. He goes, is that all? So there is value. There's perceived value in natural diamonds. We have not lost that, is the point. So to at least be able to appeal to those price points, to be able to appeal, that's where Desert Diamonds, I think, did a brilliant job, because you don't typically see those colors in labs. And when you're racing to perfection, you're not looking at beauty per se, you're making it mathematical, you're making it transactional, where this is the complete opposite. You're talking about what she likes, the look that she likes. You're talking about candlelight cut, things that are more aligned with romance and, vintage nostalgia. You take it outside. And it's not to say that you're not showing them a white diamond next to it. It's just going in a gold setting. And that sale was done in 15, 20 minutes max.
Well, may all your sales be that effective and and
well
successful.
Amazingly enough, you know what he asked at the end?
Yeah.
He goes, can you just send it to GIA?
Oh, really?
And it came back a color grade lower.
Lower.
And he didn't care. Didn't even matter.
Well, it shows if the consumer falls in love with a piece, that's the that's the biggest tell um, at the end of the day. And I think that's another, it brings us back to that issue that we mentioned earlier about the sort of commoditization or standardization of lab grown that I think will feed into the natural diamond story. I do want to touch on one last topic before we sign off, and that is the sort of balance between category marketing and company marketing and branding. And you mentioned earlier that that the industry as a whole needs to sort of rally behind. Um, I think you mentioned the ethical issue. Um, but what are your thoughts on how jewelers can tap into the category marketing? So you mentioned Desert Diamonds. That's the De Beers initiative that is being sort of positioned as a beacon, a concept that all can tap into and sell. Um, but then, there's the origin storyline that's been emphasized in the last few years on a category level. I know how you've approached it, which I think is a good model because you're tapping into that Botswana story, which is kind of a category angle, but really putting your own spin and branding behind it. But it seems like that's a hurdle that many in the industry sort of have and struggle with. That there's category marketing, but De Beers does it, the NDC does it. I just got to rely on them and sort of be a passive player in that story. I don't see the practical sort of way I can use it.
So great point. I think the beacons compared to what they used to be, it still doesn't seem like it's fully funded yet, that it's not really reaching the critical mass where a jeweler can sit back and wait for it to come to them. And that's my opinion because I've been waiting, for the NDC to get funded and all these different things. I'm like, when's that? What is it, 1% or whatever it's supposed to be from the producer countries? And when's this big campaign going to hit and all these different things? Where's all the clients barging through my door asking for desert diamonds? Well, I don't think that it's going to be as big as what in this, or at least arrive in the same fashion that Center of My Universe did, or Three Stone Ring, or those sort of things. Where, however, I would argue that the industry needs those. Those are things that, and if you notice, the other ones prior to Desert Diamonds, and again, I could be getting Desert Diamonds wrong, but they really tied into emotion. I mean, Center of My Universe, past, present, future, they all have these meanings that are very easy for the client to comprehend. So for jewelers that are out there saying, okay, you know what, that's their job, that needs to come from them. I think you got to find your own way to tell that story. And it could be with partnerships through the designers that you have. I'm sure there's plenty of hopefully independent designers that are listening to what we're doing. But a lot of people, like Clear Cut was a great advocate for naturals, and they got sold to Signet, and hopefully that'll continue.
Yeah.
But I want to see more than just, if it's up to me, like the ultimate goal is really people tying into that human story and really understanding where their product comes from, because I think they'll be more passionate about it and be more apt to talk about it with their customers. And I think really the key here is getting critical mass amongst the jewelers in general to tell a positive story about natural diamonds. And I think that, to me, is where our responsibility as jewelers lies, because or else we're just leading ourselves like a bunch of sheep down into this valley, which is very scary, and you need people like, it's the world's favorite punching bag in the diamond industry. You need a De Beers, because they're leaders. You need something to, I would say, center your attention on, or basically have a mentor in this industry of how you're going to conduct your business. And I think that's where origin comes in. De Beers is smart in the way that they're approaching it. They're not, I don't believe they're expecting you to tell the stories of each individual country. Origin is just their way of doing business and telling that story in a very neat, tight way. It's very controlled within the app. You see the rough crystal, which is of interest. I know you said earlier that, it's debatable whether that's of interest or not. Apparently, back to your sponsor, Serene told me a great story when I was researching this, that there's a store in Japan where they display the rough acrylic model and people get super interested in it and start pointing out the trigons.
I stand corrected. I have seen that.
So anyway, so there are some that do care, but back to the De Beers app, it talks about rarity score and different things like that. And it's got a nice way of telling the story. But with them, I keep telling them, I'm like, you need to tell more of the human story, or at least have the people themselves over there getting out there and telling their story, because that's still lost, right now on the majority of people. And I don't think jewelers, as much as they say they understand where their diamonds come from and all of these different things, I don't think a lot of them really have followed it down to how regulated our industry is. And it's something to be proud of. And that's, if you really go down the rabbit hole with the De Beers people, I tell them, I'm like, why don't you put your audits front and center? Why don't you put these different things front and center? Because really going back to that ethics thing, it is the thing that we need to protect and rally around. And that's where origin comes in. That's where I think the story of beneficiation comes in. The human story, people do care about people. Of course, they care about the environment too, but there's stories to be told there too of how, the mines are turned into preserves and how, that area is off limits to poachers, to this, to that. And really it's not a perfect scenario, but it's as good as we can get, and very happy. And I hope that Gareth Penny gets back in charge at De Beers there. And
quite an endorsement.
Well, long story short, I think whether it's him or somebody else, somebody that knows diamonds is not going to take that company and just, not understand the mystique and beauty of what a diamond can be. Because to your point, you asked earlier about luxury companies and why haven't there been more successes in that luxury space? That's the only other thing that maybe would be an awesome thing to see, is one of these luxury houses and see what they can do with it, because the raw material is awesome and I'm in awe of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fitting that you bring Gareth into this conversation, because he when De Beers was shifting to away from category marketing, he was pushing the industry to develop more brands. And I think he read the market correctly, because it was at the time when De Beers was developing Forevermark, and they sort of read the market, the retail space and the consumer space is changing towards and shifting towards branding, strong branding, and they recognized that there weren't enough strong diamond brands. And that was the whole idea behind the Supply of Choice program, which we can write research reports about and critiquing or complimenting. But I think the idea was correct, or the reading of the market was correct. And I think, but what I think it maybe led to is that it's the industry's mindset of it's one or the other. We try to brand diamonds. We didn't have category marketing for a long time. The industry suffered. Now we're going back into category marketing, but it certainly shouldn't be to the exclusion of developing strong storylines. And I think maybe to conclude, when we think about category marketing, maybe the danger is that companies see it as generic, and so it's not going. How how does a jeweler or a manufacturer differentiate their own offering within the category marketing storyline that everyone needs to unite behind? And the idea is to be creative. You can't be passive in this world. And
100%.
so I think again we kind of agreed on most
I got
topics.
one tiny thing to add at the end. How I wish Origin was part of Forevermark. Like, in other words, I wish Forevermark was Origin. They just missed it by a few years, right? Because I think this is a great story to tell. Forevermark was filled with the right idea, but not a lot of specifics. And there were a lot of missteps there. Obviously, creating your own report and then having some unsubstantiated claim that these are the best cut diamonds in the world. What does that mean? Or like and the tolerances were too wide. And there's a ton of different things. But that idea of what you're saying, there can be both. Forevermark could, and maybe there'll be another version of it someday.
I think it's called Origin.
Yeah. Well, the jewelry's not there yet. So I hope it is coming. And that would be beautiful because that's what it needs. It needs design. You're right.
There is a perception that, and for those who are not aware, Origin is the De Beers diamond brand that they recently introduced. They stopped Forevermark except in India, and introduced Origin as their new sort of diamond brand. And there is a perception that it's very there's too much of an overlap with Forevermark, but I know that there are very distinct differences both in the offering to retailers and also into the mechanics behind the brand. And so that's something I need to write up and research a bit more, but that there are very distinct questions that I think De Beers answered there. But I think you would know better, having worked with it, I think. So anyway, Sean, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast, and thank you for your insights. I think you brought a lot of value to
I hope so.
to this branding discussion. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening.